Okay. So, Luis, I think we can start.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, good night, good evening for people from the different time zones. This is the commemorative event we organized here at the Artificial Life Conference 2021 in memory of Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. We have organized this event thanks to the will of myself, Luisa Damiano, Takashi Kegami, and Olaf Witkowski. And I have to thank the organizer of the main conference for this opportunity and for finding the free slot for this event, which was organized a bit not simultaneously to Artificial Life, and mainly because we decided to do this kind of in memory event because Humberto Maturana passed away the last May. So the organization was a little bit late with respect to the rest of the conference. Okay, so why 50 years with autopoiesis? The reason, of course, is that the theory of autopoiesis born around 50 years ago, and the notion of autopoiesis probably in the 1970, 1971, the term autopoiesis, the word autopoiesis was coined in these times. And we are here actually to commemorate Humberto Maturana, who recently passed away. And also, this is an occasion to commemorate Francisco Varela because of the 20 years from his departure. So, as we know, autopoiesis is a theory which proposes two main research questions. The first one is central questions about science of life, that is, what is life? And the other one is about the cognitive science, what is cognition? And Maturana Varela answers derive ultimately, directly or indirectly, from the very peculiar way matter is structurally and dynamically organized in living organisms as an autopoietic machine. So according to their words, an autopoietic machine is a machine organized, defined as a unity, as a network of processes of production, transformation and destruction of components, which through their interaction and transformation continuously regenerate and realize the network of the processes, relations that produce them. And also this component constitute it, the machine, as a concrete unit in space, in which the components exist, by specifying the topological domain of its realization as such a network. So this is the original definition of autopoietic machine of 1973. Autopoiesis is also related to the notion of cognition, and in the words of Maturana, living systems are cognitive systems, and living as a process is a process of cognition. And here we have reported the three of the main books about autopoiesis. The first one, published in Spanish, De Maquinas y Seres Vivos. The second, Autopoiesis and Condition, and also the El Arbor de Conocimiento. So the autopoiesis theory has a big influence in several aspects of science and knowledge. For example, in theoretical biology, as a theory of living, in cognitive science, in the so-called Santiago theory of cognition, and of course is important for all theories which rely on systemic perspectives, organization theories, the concept of emergence, the concept of complexity. And it can be used, for example, as a guide, as a framework of thinking for disciplines like artificial life, synthetic biology, origins of life, and system chemistry. These are synthetic methods which adapt the bottom-up approaches. Moreover, there is also an aspect, a derivation of autopoiesis important for social sciences, even if autopoiesis at the beginning was defined for in the molecular domain, but there are some authors which have adapted it also to social sciences. So this evening, we are going to commemorate these two important authors by three speakers. And the program will be the following. First, we will have three short talks by Pierluigi Luisi, Juan Carlos Letelier, and Jorge Soto Andrade. Pierluigi Luisi will present an overview about autopoiesis. Then Juan Carlos Letelier will illustrate early connection between cybernetics and autopoietics by means of explaining the Humberto Maturana and Heinz von Forster friendship. Finally, Jorge Soto Andrade will tell us something about the concept and the metaphor of Ouroboros in Maturana and Varela work. Next, we will have a roundtable discussions with some questions that we have prepared for our speakers. And finally, there is time for questions from the audience. Okay, so we can start immediately. So I stop my sharing the screen and I ask Pierluigi to share your screen directly now. So if you can show the slides now.
I don't have slides.
Okay, so you can speak perfect, no problem. So we are ready to listen to you. Thank you.
Okay, a few words about autopoiesis. Although what Pasquale said, it's already very explicative and very clear. But let me recall, as a biologist, that on our Earth we have something like 3 million different species of organisms, which is a really remarkable number. And all these species have the same biologics of life. They all understand and obey the notion of autopoiesis. Consider that this is no trivial observation, that all what is living in our Earth, from microbes to insects, to snakes, to bird, to fish, to plants, everything that comes to your mind has the same type of mechanism for being alive, and this is autopoiesis. We usually take all for granted and we don't wonder anymore about the wonders of nature, but this is instead a real big wonder. What is autopoiesis? It's known to most of you, most of us. Let's take our body. My hemoglobin is a wonderful protein, but lives in my body only for a couple of days, then is degraded and destroyed, but it is immediately replaced, regenerated by the mechanism of the body. From inside the body, hemoglobin is again regenerated. The same applies for all my cells. All my cells, most of them, 80% of them, live only a couple of months, then they are dying, they are eliminated, but they are regenerated again from within the borders of my body. So life is indeed this paradox of two opposites. From the one hand, there is the self-maintenance, the constance of the structure, The cat is always the cat of yesterday and tomorrow, but instead the cat is never the same because it changes every second, but its part has been replaced by about the same part. So there is this self-maintenance, which is the product of self-generation from within. And this is the general feature, which, as I said, is true for all living organisms on our Earth. And no exception is known to these biologics. And Maturana and Varela, of course, emphasize that this regeneration is due to nutrients and energy coming from the environment. It's impossible to talk about life without invoking immediately the environment. And here comes immediately the notion of cognition that Maturana and Varela so aptly apply to life itself. Cognition, according to Maturana and Varela, is the doing of the organism in order to implement its own autopoiesis. What the organism does in order to maintain the identity of the structure and maintain the autopoiesis. And I like to think of cognition, and I had a few long discussions with Humberto about that. I see as the interaction of the living with the environment, interaction in the sense that the organism is able to recognize and live with its specific organism. The fish with water, the mud for the earthworm, the air with the butterfly. And of course, for Maturana and Varela, the living is a thermodynamically open system. Something enter, food, energy, something comes out, catabolites, but they maliciously add something more. They say, look, the living is thermodynamically open, okay, but is closed from the point of view of information. What does that mean? It means something, again, which appears very trivial. It means that the butterfly, in order to be a butterfly, does not need any information from the outside. The same for the lizard, the same for the elephant. So all what the organism needs for its own autopoiesis is inside the organism, and there is no way to enter in the inside of the organism in order to reveal this acrobacy in order to maintain the autopoiesis. This is, as I say, the trivial point, but very subtle, because this notion of being closed opens up instead some big compartment. The one is that of perception. The other one, complementary one, is the one of consciousness. Does the lizard know to be a lizard? Is the butterfly aware of flying? Or they are all machines which blindly follow what the genome says and have no perception, no awareness of what are they doing? Those are questions which are very deep and profound and still need an answer. But let me say in the last few minutes, a few words about the question. whether it is possible to implement, to make in the laboratory by using wet chemistry in autopoietic system. The answer is positive, and in our group, in my group in Zurich in the early 90s, we were successful in that. We did make an autopoietic system with the help of spherical structure, which are the well-known micelles. The micelles is what you do when you wash your hands with soap. The soap is a surfactant which is able to make little spherical aggregates of some million of surfactant soap molecules, a sphere, and we were able to find a compound which binds to these spherical aggregates and through a chemical reaction release a substance which is the same surfactant which makes the micelle. In this way, the micelle is making the surfactant which makes the micelle, and this brings to an enlargement of the structure, eventually to a division, and from 2 you make 4, from 4 you make 8, from 8 you make 16, a kind of exponential auto-replication way. All comes from the internal boundary of the system and is therefore autopoietic. And we publish the article in a nice Nature book, but I like to recall an interesting detail. When we published this paper, Francisco, who was in contact with me, had come to Zurich to discuss with us the possibility of this implementation. He said, Luigi, you should call this micelle living. I refused to do so. He said, well, you, Luigi, are too sentimental. You don't want to apply the notion of life. But if something is autopoietic, this must be living. I still refuse to put the name living to my simple micelle, but this is a question which I'm going to pose to all of you who are more expert in autopoiesis as I am. The question is, if I make in the lab something which is autopoietic, and you believe that autopoiesis is the signature of life, is then so that whatever is autopoietic must be living? Or is instead so that autopoiesis is just the necessary but not the sufficient condition for life? With this simple question, I thank you for the attention and give the place to my next neighbor. Thank you, Pasquale.
You are mute.
Okay,
Juan
thank
Carlos.
you very much. Thank you very much, Luigi, for these fascinating words. And now we have the next speaker is Juan Carlos Letelier from Santiago. And please, you can start.
Perfect. Let me see if it works. Then you should be seeing like a PowerPoint presentation, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Well,
yes,
thank you very much for inviting me here today. And today I'm not going to talk about the technical aspects of the theory, but I'm going to make like instead a quick summary of the first 20 years. This is a theory that is almost 50 years old. And in honor of Humberto Maturana, who was quite a remarkable scientist, and also little aspects about Francisco Varela. First, I need to tell you about certain aspects of Maturana life that are not very well known. You know, he was born in 1928, and in 1940 he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. That in Chile at that time was a very, very serious disease. Yeah, and he in fact had to go to the typical procedures at that time to get rid of tuberculosis, to go to a mountain, a spa, and things like that. And then he entered the medical school of the Universidad de Chile. He entered that in 1950, but immediately he realized that his things was not medicine. Then he managed to convince someone, and he got a very small fellowship to go to England and to study with the great zoologist of the time, that was J.C. Young, who was extremely well known. And he wanted to get a PhD in morphology in order to return to Chile to help in the formation of doctors. But the English said, no, first you don't have an recognized degree, you come from Chile, who knows the quality. Then they didn't allow him to enroll in an English university, but J.C. Young discovered that he was quite a valuable person. Then he moved his influence, and Maturana landed a PhD in Harvard, where he did a PhD in some aspects of neuroscience about the myelinization of the optic nerve of salamanders. Then after he finished his PhD, he met an enfant terrible of neuroscience, an amazing person, Jerome Ledwin. And Jerome Ledwin was working in the group of McCullough, Warren McCullough, who is one of the founders of the American Association for Cybernetics. And there they did this paper, fundamental papers about perception. They did this paper in 1950. And this is this paper, what is called "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain," is a classical paper in neuroscience, and constructed the reputation of neuroscience of Maturana as a top-notch neuroscientist in one day. This was a very important paper, and some of the co-authors were very important names. Were Warren McCullough, you know, who with Pitts has produced like the first paper of neural networks in 1943, a classical paper. But Maturana, after finished that, he really had a commitment to return to Chile and not to stay in the US. What was the facto, the most standard solution was to have a scientific career in the US. And then he insisted because he wanted to return to Chile. And then he returned in 1961. And he returned to Chile in 1961. Meanwhile, I'm going to introduce you another guest in our history today is Hein von Foester. Hein von Foester was a physicist, a very young physicist who came from Austria to the US just after the Second World War. And he was very clever. And immediately they gave him the job of being the secretary of the famous Macy's conference. And there he met the top notch of US scientific establishment. And then he was a professor, you know, he got a professorship in the University of Illinois. But in 1957, because the Soviet Union put the Sputnik in orbit, the United States said, oh, this is a red menace. And then they created 2 or 3 important things. One thing was NASA was created because of that. And the other thing that they created was something called BCL, Biological Computer Laboratory, that was meant to be the laboratory of the future, where the future will be invented with these amazing devices called computer and with the science of cybernetics. Then Hein von Foester was the director of this lab, he was his only director, and this lab existed until 1975 when it was closed. You're going to see why, you know, more or less. Because he didn't produce, this lab didn't produce any nice gadget for the US government, who was the purpose of the lab. And in fact, here I show you the picture of the first conference of artificial life. In 1960, BCL, BCL in 1960, in order to appear in society, organized a big conference in the University of Illinois called First Conference on Self-Organization, who was de facto the first conference on artificial life, by the way, because you had some topics on artificial life. And this picture was taken in that conference. And you have some important people here in this conference. There you have Ludwig von Bertalanffy. Here it's McCulloch. And here you have, let me, well, there you have someone very important in the story, Stafford Beer, who was a very important cybernetician in England. The English were ahead in cybernetics, and he was the top-notch cybernetician of English society. Here you have Friedrich von Hayek, who was an economist and had an idea of self-organization of economy. And von Hayek was very influential in the creation of the neoliberal movement of economy. And here you have von Fester. And these three people, von Beer, Stafford Beer, von Hayek, and von Fester, are going to be very important in the politics of Chile at the beginning of in the government of Salvador Allende. Then Maturana returned to Chile in '61 and created a lab that still existed, and I am a member of that lab. It's a lab that has been around for 60 years. It's not common to have a lab that is around for 60 years. And in one conference, in Europe, Maturana encounters Hein von Fester, and an immediate, very intense friendship began. And because of that, von Fester, in fact, spent in the year 65, 66, like half a year as a sabbatical year in Chile, in the lab of Maturana in the Universidad de Chile. And 4 years later, Maturana spent almost 10 months at BCL, and in this, as a visiting professor at BCL. And in BCL, he wrote the most fundamental document of all this problem, this history. And this fundamental document is called the Technical Report number 9, and it's called Biology of Cognition. And there he said that the fundamental aspect of the nervous system is closure. This is where then the fundamental aspect of all the work of Maturana refers to the nervous system, not to metabolism. Autopoiesis was not born in that paper. Yeah? In 1970, Allende was elected president of Chile, and this inaugurated a period, an amazing period, with tragic ending in Chile. Then this is the following things that are. Then in 1971, at the beginning of the Allende government, amazing, because Latin America is the continent of dreaming, and we follow magical realism. For us, reality is magical. Then in 1971, the Allende government decided to cybernetize the Chilean economy. Imagine, and then using a network of telex devices, the old teletypes, and a single IBM 360 mainframe, they decided that they're going to put all the Chilean economy in a computer and then going to optimize the production of meat, eggs, and lettuce. And this is the project, the Cinco project that I'm going to talk about. And in '71, Hein von Fester returns to Chile, and he gave a first seminar on cybernetics at the Universidad de Chile, who was very well attended. And in '72, and this is a crucial, in '72, Varela and Maturana, they translate, in the use of translational science, they translate the metaphor of operational closure to metabolic networks, and there is the beginning of the idea of autopoiesis. And then they published this very small book. At that time, Chile had problems with paper. Then the book is very, very small because paper was very scarce. And this is the book the Máquina y Seres Vivos, where they introduced the notion of autopoietic systems. In 1972, something very also amazing happened, is that Stafford Beer, the great British cybernetician, decides to move to Chile and be the leader of the Project Cinco. And here we see in Chile, in this picture, you see Stafford Beer with the Chilean fixer. You know, the Chilean state put a, because Stafford Beer didn't speak Spanish. He didn't understand how the Chilean state worked. Then they put this fixer, Sonia Mordovich, to be his right-hand man to manage Project Cinco. And this is quite an amazing thing, because Stafford Beer moves to Chile, really moved to Chile. You know, he bought a house and he wanted to stay, to die in Chile. And in 1973, von Fester arrives back in Chile and produced the best seminar, really the best seminar on cybernetics ever. It's a 3-week course called the Cybernetics of Cognitive Processes, and with many people, Maturana, Varela, people who came with him. And the idea was to train in the concept of cybernetics all the team of the Cinco project. But you know how this story finished? Less than 2 months after the end of the course, you have the coup d'etat and the burning of the presidential palace in downtown Santiago and the death of the President Salvador Allende. You know, there you have the presidential palace is burning. Then, and this is for you, if you don't know, you know, this was the control room of the Cinco project. That is like taken from the set of Star Trek, you see, and from these chairs, the idea was some very clever people with the help of computers and very sophisticated display, they will manage the Chilean economy. You like this? It's totally crazy, yeah. But people thought at that time that this was possible. Then in 1973, many things happened. After the coup d'etat, many things. Varela had to leave Chile, really escape Chile, you know. He escaped Chile, he took the first plane that he could find, and he escaped to Costa Rica. Then I'm going to show you Hein von Fester tries to save many people of the Cinco project to find them places in academic organization. And essentially, he was very, very concerned about the safety of the people of the Cinco project. In 1974, this paper called Autopoiesis, the Organization of Living System, its characterization and a model was publicized in what is now the journal Biosystems, and with 3 names, Varela, Maturana, and Uribe, who was the professor at the Universidad de Chile who produced the code for the computer simulation that this paper has. And this was the first paper really explaining autopoiesis. And amazingly enough, Uribe also had to escape. Then Uribe was hired by BCL, and Uribe was the last person hired by BCL. And Uribe did a complete career in the University of Illinois, and he was a very much loved professor of electrical engineering, and he died like 2 years ago. And in 1975, they produced the text of Autopoiesis in the Spanish version, and the text and the paper there, they did a summary, a long, long summary, and they produced then the version 2. They produced BCL, the technical report 9.2, who is the description in English of autopoietic systems. And unfortunately, because BCL has not produced what the US wanted, you know, BCL got most of his money from the US Air Force and the Office of Naval Research, and they haven't produced any real gadget. Then they closed BCL, and von Fester had to leave the university, and he retired effectively in that time. And here you can see the letter, by example. Here you can see a letter. I don't know if you see this well. This is a letter between Hein von Fester and Stafford Beer, and exchanging information about the safety of people of the Cinco project. Here you have José María Bulnes, who was a very important person, Raúl Espejo, Figueré, Humberto Maturana, Francisco Varela. You know, they were really very concerned about the safety of the people involved in the Cinco project. Then you know that the next step of the story is that in 1980, the technical report number, the two technical reports that were technical reports were printed as a book in a book called Autopoiesis and Cognition. And this is the first time that this concept appeared for a wider academic audience in the English world. And this was the beginning of the great tsunami of autopoiesis. In 1980, also, Varela decided to return to Chile under very, 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 very difficult conditions. You cannot imagine. Varela was extremely valiant to return to Chile and to train people. I was trained by Maturana and Varela in that period. Then I really need to thank both of them. Maturana never left Chile, but Varela returned under very difficult conditions from the US to Chile, and he stayed there like 4 years. And they produced this book called The Tree of Knowledge, where they explain the big theory to the masses. And you don't know, but amazingly, the Tree of Knowledge, the real origin of the Tree of Knowledge is that Maturana and Varela gave like a private seminar to the generals of Pinochet that lasted 6 months, to the general and minister of Pinochet about how to plan the future of Chile. And once a week, they gave a course on these ideas to the generals and minister of Allende. This is quite an amazing story. This is the origin of the book. In 1986, Varela couldn't stand the universe in Chile, and then he moved first to Germany and then to France, and where he stayed until his death. And in 1992, Maturana and Podosis wrote a reinterpretation of evolution as natural drift, created in the context of structural coupling with Jorge Podosis. And I will say that in these 20 years, from 72 to 92, this is the first stage of autopoietic theory. Yeah? And then something else is going to happen, but this is not the topic of this very short remembrance of Maturana. But these were the first 20 years, the relevant aspect and how the relation with von Foester and Maturana, that is something very important to have in mind. And in the sense, autopoiesis is the true heiress of cybernetics. It's not it's not an offspring of cybernetics, but is the true heiress of cybernetics. And this is why the text of Autopoiesis is full of cybernetics, concepts from cybernetics, because these concepts were learned by Maturana when he stayed almost 1 year in BCL in 1968 and 69. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. This was really fascinating. This historical reconstruction, very useful for all of us who doesn't know very well the history of autopoiesis. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we move to the third speaker, and later there will be a round table with discussion and questions. So Jorge, if you have slides, you can share your screen.
Sorry, yes, thank you. I apologize in advance because my connection is a bit unstable, but I think it's working for the time being. So here we are. I will share my screen. Keynotes. Just 1 second, check the time. 25. I'm logged twice, so I can see, yeah, you are seeing my screen.
Yes,
and
please.
So after all that has been said, which is very interesting, I would like to focus on one recurring metaphor in Maturana's and Varela's work. Okay, which is the Ouroboros. Here you have the Ouroboros in action, And in fact, as Juan Carlos showed, the Ouroboros is present there, is lurking in the first edition of the Máquinas y Seres Vivos. And my point is that Ouroboros is an outstanding metaphor for circularity and self-reference, and also for autopoiesis. And so let me indulge in a short racconto. First of all, how do we meet? How did we meet? Actually, I met Varela as a student in a course in mathematics for biologists I gave at the Faculty of Science of the University of Chile, I think in 1966 or so. We were almost the same age, but there was so few mathematicians in Chile that when I was a student, I was already lecturing in mathematics. And of course, he was an outstanding student in this course. He was really bright in mathematics. And there we became friends and we began to collaborate. Over time, after a while in Chile, he went to Harvard and I went to Strasbourg and Paris. And we keep collaborating by airmail at this time, exchanging dozens of letters. And just let me show here a few emerging ideas. We worked on the brain-main connection via linear group representations. That's the idea that when I look at some object who is moving in space, or whether I try to recognize whether two objects are congruent and one is a rotation of the other, there is an interesting neural dynamics going on in my brain. And the point is, which is the correlation between the geometric trajectory in space, in three-dimensional space, and the trajectory in my neural system, which happens in function space. And the idea came out that this connection should be maybe embodied by some linear representation of some group. This was some work by Shepard and collaborators in California. And we came up with one idea which is quite close to the dynamics, the semi-groups, dynamics called semi-groups you have in quantum mechanics. Then another idea was the fact that in physics, symmetry groups play a crucial role. Usually a theoretical physicist looks for the symmetries of a problem he is not able to solve yet. And one question was, do you have a symmetry group for visual perception? And one idea was that since our visual perception is so stable, I turn my head like this, and the world is still there, the world I'm constructing. But the stimuli which come to my retina, they are completely there is a big lot of confusion there. They change in a dramatic way. And so this stability of our perception suggests that our neural mechanisms are invariant by some symmetry group, which is none other than the group of rigid motions in R3 space, in three-dimensional space. And so this led us to conjecture something about visual receptive fields and so on, related to the so-called spherical function of this transformation group. This is maybe a research line which hasn't been so much exploited since then. Then we had Lovier's theorem and self-reference, which is related to Cantor diagonal argument. The biographical point here is one day Pancho came to my office and said, look, I found this paper which seems interesting, but it is really a brick. I cannot really make sense of it. It's really very fancy mathematics. And in fact, this was very fancy mathematics even for mathematicians. I will just show the first page of this, make a quick comments. But what comes later is the Ouroboros equation, which is implicit in this paper. And one idea, even math education idea, which is that all relevant math for biologists can be introduced via systems theory. So let me, this is the paper, and there the idea came out that self-reference and secularity, which seems to be a plague in a context like incompleteness theorem or Russell's paradox, it's really something very interesting and meaningful. It was already considered such an interesting thing in computer science, in loopy flow diagrams. But here, Pancho pointed out that this was a key notion in biology. And so one key idea was that when you look at metabolism or living systems, the difference between a transformation, its inputs and its outputs fades away. So in some sense, metabolism is at the same time input, output, and transformation. This we develop, yeah, these are the comments I've just mentioned. And Ouroboros equation, this is, we developed this later, sorry. I'm trying to go back. In Artificial Life Conference in France, in Paris, in I think 2012, with Juan Carlos and other collaborators, we wrote a paper called Ouroboros Avatars, in which we tried to make a survey of the different avatars of Ouroboros in mathematics and related fields and other fields. And there we made an explicit mention, we discussed in an explicit way this equation, which looks quite weird. And in some sense, this was Pancho's intuition, encapsulates the idea of self-reference. And of course, it's not so obvious how can a function work like this. But one idea that came up is that solutions of this equation are not just functions, are a generalization of functions, mathematically speaking, which are categories. A category is sort of a bunch of arrows. You look at a function as an arrow, a transformation, which go from one source to a target, and they compose. And so actually we're working, work in progress is related to a categorical approach to Ouroboros equation. Also, one idea which is mentioned in this paper is that you can get such solutions for such an equation as limits of honest objects in usual mathematics. So some people tackle this looking for solutions which are really transcendental with respect to classical mathematics. And another approach is to look for solutions which are sort of limits, as fractals are limits of honest pictures, honest images. They are sort of mythical limits or mythical pictures or figures. So here, I'm trying, it seems my connection, yeah. This is summarized in this poster, which we presented at the Applied Category Theory Congress at MIT in 2020. And there you have some interesting pictures or diagrams. For instance, you have this toy model of a metabolism in which you have just three reactants, S, T, and U, which are sort of mana. You can have them freely from the environment, and they combine. And for instance, S and U combine to react to give SU, and this is metabolized by another one of those metabolites. This is maybe more visible if I am able to, which I am not. I'm trying to go further. In these diagrams, at the right, you have the zoom out of this system, in which you see S and T give ST by a reaction which is metabolized by STU. But STU is produced in turn by SU and by ST and U, which is in turn metabolized by SU. So you have here a loopy system and an embodiment, an elementary, a toy embodiment of Ouroboros, of circularity. And at the left, you have, sorry, what you see if you zoom in into this diagram. So a node becomes a diagram in itself. And this is an interesting notion in mathematics, zooming in and zooming out on graphs or even categories. So we have a work in progress in this area. This is just one preliminary drawing of this sort of compositionality. And well, maybe my final image would just suggest that well, there is an Ouroboric mathematics to be developed, which hasn't been so much developed until now, because mathematics usually has been developed for the needs of physics and more or less shunning circularity. So I am trying to go further. That's it. Yeah, so I would close with this image just to suggest that there is very much to explore that, and that Varela's insights on this circularity and these Ouroboros were really pioneering. And so there is much which remains to be done. So we are very interested in interdisciplinary collaboration on this. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We thank you, Jorge, for this mathematical explanation of deep concepts in autopoiesis. You know, the organizational closure, metabolic closure, everything is related to this metaphor of the Ouroboro. So thank you very much. Now the program foresee a kind of round table discussion, and there are some questions we prepare for the speakers, and my colleague Luisa Damiano will coordinate this discussion, and therefore and afterward we will have questions from the audience. I see already some questions in the chat. Then we will have time to present these questions to the speakers. So Luisa, please, you can start.
Thank you very much, Pasquale. I would like really to thank our speakers, because I have really the feeling that something exceptional is going on here this evening, or this morning, or during the day in other parts of the world. And I would like to start with some questions for Pierluigi, and in particular a question that you mentioned at the end of your talk. That is, what you think. Do you think that life and autopoiesis are overlapping, that everything is autopoietic is living, or as it seems you suggested, you think that autopoiesis is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for life? What is your opinion about this?
You are asking me? I am the one who, well, when I ask this question, I really meant it as a question, in the sense that I don't know precisely the answer. I can tell you that is the general problem when you try to give a definition. You give a definition of democracy, and once you have given that and accepted, then automatically, I don't know, China is going to be out or in, depending strictly on what you have defined as democracy. I mean with that once you have a written definition, this is also a kind of jacket which obliges you to accept or reject certain members of the world, of the society. I believe that once you accept the theory of autopoiesis, and you accept it really by saying that this is the necessary and sufficient conditions for life, then whenever you do a system which is autopoietic, you must conclude honestly that this is living. And I wrote once a paper with Michel Bitbol, the philosopher, where we wrote that autopoiesis is not enough for having life. You have to have at the same time cognition. But again, in that paper, we define cognition in a very particular way, going back to Piaget and other. And again, this sufficient condition is again defined by some definition, which is subjective and arguable. So I think this is the general problem here, is a semantic philosophical problem about the importance of a certain definition when we put in words certain concepts. And then if we believe to our own words, we have to accept this jacket. And whether in the case of autopoiesis, we should really accept it. Honestly, I don't know. I am hesitant to call my autopoietic myself living. Francisco Varela was telling me, Luigi, this is sentimentality. You don't want to call living something which is not biological, which has no genes. And I say to him, yeah, maybe that's sentimental, but I would miss something by calling living my autopoietic myself. And this is the really my truth. I recognize that my autopoietic system are autopoietic, in principle should be called living, but I have the greatest difficulty in doing that, and I prefer not to do it.
Do you think we can distinguish different levels of autopoiesis, and also a level which is not living and not cognitive, and the level that is living and cognitive? Maybe a solution.
I don't know what cognitive means, because cognition, as I said before, has a double meaning. The butterfly is living and a cognitive organism. But does the butterfly know to be a butterfly? Probably not. Probably a butterfly or a lizard do their living, do their autopoiesis just as automatas by obeying their genomes. I remember to have these arguments in a series of lectures I gave to a Buddhist monastery, but that would be, but you see, when you say that the amoeba swim in a gradient of sugar in order to eat, this notion of intentionality, that the amoeba does it to eat, it's a projection of your mind, is a projection of the observer. The amoeba, poor beast, does not know anything about glucose, about gradient, about eating. It does what it has to do, it does its doing because the genome impels it to do so. In terms of physics, what happens is that the amoeba has a certain surface, And when you apply a difference of concentration from here to there, there is a contraction which makes the amoeba jump, but is not that the amoeba knows. So even the notion of cognition, autopoiesis, and would not be enough for me. And I think all autopoiesis is cognitive in the sense of Maturana, because if autopoiesis is living, everything which is living is cognitive, even the microbe. But that does not mean that the microbe knows what it's doing.
So consciousness is another level then of cognition. So many thanks for sharing with us your thoughts about this. It's very fascinating. Another question that I have for you is related to the recognition of the theory of autopoiesis by biology. I mean that this theory was never recognized by the mainstream of biology, in particular by the mainstream of molecular biology and biochemistry. What do you think about this? Why the mainstream tends to reject this theory?
I keep saying, even in my last article, that the field of origin of life and molecular biology of life in general is dominated by a series of prejudices. And one of these is certainly implemented by the NASA group and the NASA scientists. And I have witnessed with Francisco a couple of very hard discussions. In one of those, Francisco left the room slamming the doors because NASA people were saying that the signature of life was reproduction. And of course, Francisco and I, in less measure, were saying, look, but reproduction is a consequence of life. Have you ever seen organism who reproduce without being alive? But still, you know, if you ask any American student now what is life, they will 90% answer life is reproduction. And this kind of prejudice, you know, it's just like when some people believe that the earth is flat. It's very hard to convince them that the earth is spherical. And I have been in several meetings, of course, of the origin of life, and I have never seen autopoiesis cited once, you know, once. And all the established scientists in the origin of life and molecular biology, particularly in the States, dominated by the NASA philosophy, don't even know what is that. I remember that we won on the last meeting, then I stopped going. I asked to say something and the chairman said, oh, now Luigi is say something about that thing, what do you call it? Auto what? You know, and I said, thanks, I don't need to talk. But, you know, this is the situation. It's, I would say, strong bias and strong prejudice. You know, if you look at the definition of life which the NASA gives and which is used by NASA people also in their paper, which is that life is a system which is where the Darwinian evolution is doing its job. namely something which is based on the Darwinian evolution. You know, this is something abhorrent, because then at that point one could say, yes, but what is life? And I would say that the general field of life is dominated today by a series of prejudice and bias which are simply wrong and false. And we have to wait 1 or 2 generations until this ends.
Thank you so much. I see some raised hands, among which there is the hands of Juan Carlos. So as the next question is for him, maybe if he wants to intervene. And
I would like to say about why this theory is not used by bench biologists, by common day life biologists, is because the theory is still very primitive. We have not been able to transform the theory from these very big principles that I believe in them to a concrete results that have technical capacity. We don't have the theorem, the result, the viewpoint that will help biologists at the bench. Then we lack the theory. Even after 50 years, the theory is still very primitive. This is why we have a complete work to do. We have a lot of work is ahead of us. Yeah? This is why the theory is never going to be used by a biologist at the stage of development that is now.
We wanted yet to ask you about the future of autopoiesis, because with your really deep knowledge about the genealogy of autopoiesis, of the history of autopoiesis, we saw only a bit this evening, but already opened to us a wider perspective, also to the one of us that are trying to reconstruct the history of this great theory. We wanted to ask you, on the basis of your knowledge of the genealogy and the current state of the recognition of the theory, what you expect for the future of autopoiesis, its impact on scientific and philosophical research about life and cognition, and also maybe in the field of life, artificial life.
Perfect. No, we are going to transform the universe. It's obvious. Yeah? Then what is going to happen first? The first stage of autopoiesis is until 92. Yeah. The second stage is from 92 to today, where people like me and others, we have been trying to use the ideas of Rosen and other of these ideas about metabolism. Yeah. This is like the second stage. But the next stage is, without any doubt, the joining of cognition devices. In this sense, I differ from Dr. Pierluigi Luisi. The cognition, from the point of view of autopoietic theory, is the cognition. And there, the crucial element is the idea of a structural coupling. And this is why I encourage all of you, if you have time tomorrow, to go to the meeting of the workshop, because we are going to present 2 different viewpoints about how an autopoietic system becomes a cognitive device. And then the crucial aspect, this is a secret. I shouldn't do it, but because I am in Latin America, I shouldn't give this knowledge to you today, but the crucial aspect is to use the Fokker-Planck equation to understand biological cognition as a diffusion and as a Bayesian inference using the background of Fokker-Planck equations.
Okay, thank you very much. I see also that Daniel has his hand raised. I asked to wait 1 second, that we pose a couple of questions also to Jörg, and then we ask you to intervene. So thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And to Jörg, I wanted to ask what he thinks was the role of mathematics in the development of the theory of autopoiesis. So you met Francisco Varela when he was a student, so before that the theory could be constituted. So we wanted to ask you what you think was the role of mathematics, of his research in mathematics in the development of the theory of autopoiesis, and maybe also in the development of an action.
Yes. Well, I remember having participated in a seminar they had Maturana and Varela in the 70s I guess maybe when he came back to Chile before going back to France. And yeah, we had the feeling that the mathematics of autopoiesis were to be done still, that Maturana said that in words, to him, the theory was rather complete. But I think not so much progress has been done in this direction. As I said, the mathematics of circularity and so on is rather underdeveloped. In any case, Varela made an interesting attempt to introduce self-reference from scratch, inspired by Spencer Brown, laws of form. But maybe this actually wasn't so fruitful. And one idea, Maturana always thought that this should emerge rather from your formal construction, rather than to be put there from scratch. And I think this is, I would say that the exponential development of the ideas in applied category theory may give an interesting way to approach this, which is far more advanced than the rather cursory use Robert Rosen made of category theory in his interesting papers. So I think there is much to be explored that way, but ACT, as they call now, may be a very useful tool. They have done a lot of work related to dynamical systems or Bayesian categories and so on.
And thank you very much. And you think that what you think is the connection between the view of cognition that was developed in the context of the theory of autopoiesis and the view of cognition that is typical of the theory of enaction? Working with, I understood that you kept contact with Francisco Varela, with Pancho, during also this period of transition from the collaboration with Maturana to his own work on enaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe I've been more interested in enaction, I would say, also in sort of applied fields like learning or even mathematics education. I think this idea or this insight has been surprisingly fruitful. And I think there is a whole trend which is very well exemplified by the journal Constructivist Foundations regarding some work being done on neglected aspects of Varela's work, because enaction is a really sort of a mind-blowing insight. So many people just take from this what more or less fits their current view of the world. So they don't really, how could I say, take advantage of the deep insight which is there, which is of course highly constructivist. And this eventually changes many ideas about how do we teach and learn and cognize. Yes.
Thank you very much. I see that Daniel is still here. So if Daniel, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I had a comment. I'm sorry, I dropped out. My internet connection decided that I shouldn't be here, but I decided I want to be. So I wanted to comment to Pierluigi earlier. I completely agree with you with the issue about reproduction. That's something that it's a constant battle to fight. But I think the way to argue that is, in my opinion, simply by saying a reproduction is just a very successful way of ensuring the principles of life. It's not the only one. It's just super, the super obvious way of doing it for small vulnerable systems. So if you're a small vulnerable system and you have an idea how to do autopoiesis and how to self-sustain, then you are vulnerable to destruction or to being eaten or whatever. And therefore, self-reproducing means this idea lives on, right? Even if the individual carrying it doesn't. So I think that's why they confound it. And I'm assuring you that if an American university, somebody at an American university discovers that or rediscovers that, they will suddenly, oh yeah, this is paradigm shift, and everybody will accept that as the new truth. But the actual
Sure.
I think that unfortunately
somebody didn't like what I said. Sorry, I was cut out again.
Yes.
The thing that I wanted to ask you, I mean, the link between cognition and autopoiesis. To me, the whole thing, I mean, of course, I would have to say that is information. So the key is information. And my question to you, is there any major line of research that you know from your area, and I'm asking anyone on the panel here, that you know that uses information theory to implement this? I mean, I know this is not the only way to do it, but information theory has a lot of advantages, and of course, this is a special hobby horse of mine. So, do you know any information theoretic approach to this type, to autopoiesis and the related theories?
Anyone? I
Sorry?
think you and everybody on the panel.
Everybody, whoever wants to answer. I mean, I'm happy to learn from anyone.
Let me just perhaps add about this reproduction story, that what you say, you know, the point is that is conceptually, philosophically wrong to say that life is the product of reproduction. Philosophically, logically wrong, because in order to have reproduction, you have first to have life. You cannot have a reproduction if you don't have life. And therefore, logically, philosophically, it cannot be so that reproduction is the origin of life. And you know, adding to that, going back to the point why autopoiesis is not in the mainstream, the other way of telling that, which is equivalent, is that autopoiesis never put in emphasis DNA. You know, we are, as Fox Keller wrote in a famous book, The Age of the Genes, we are in the century of gene. Everything is DNA, everything is nucleic acid, and autopoiesis is that theory that defines life without ever using the term DNA or RNA, because indeed they are important, but you know, like water is important or ATP is important, everything is important. In order to make DNA, you need enzyme and so on. So, but the fact that I was told actually a few times, you know, in this meeting that you know, you don't like DNA, you don't even put it forward. Where is it? And when I say that according to autopoiesis, DNA is important as any other member of the group, that doesn't catch, you know.
It's also still a residual of mechanisms that we have here. We cannot overcome this. So it's still the fact that proposing a systemic view is still a problem.
Yes, yes.
As we see in all the crises we are addressing now. I think.
Yes, that's important what you said. Autopoiesis is very systemic as a philosophy, as a concept. You know, it takes all interaction together. Autopoiesis is the main theory of mutual interaction. When you look at a cell where you have 10,000 components, they are all united in the same net. So each one depends on the previous one. And if you want a little bit of Buddhism, that means that if you look for something in that metabolic chart which has an intrinsic existence, you do not find it, because each one depends on the previous and disappears with the next, which is also an example of impermanence. This is a little bit of the Tao of biology. But the main point was that indeed autopoiesis, it's the theory of relation. You know, life is there not because there is DNA, but because there are 1,000 things which interacts with each other to make something new emerge. And this new quality that emerged from this interaction is something we call life.
Thank you so much. And to Daniel, I think that there are really Heinz von Förster, who was mentioned before, and also Henri Atlan were developing this kind of approach through the theory of information, but tendentially in the domain in which the theory of autopoiesis is accepted and developed, the theory of information is dropped, because they try to define life and cognition without referring to the notion of information. So I don't know if there are other questions from the audience.
Luisa,
Yeah.
I saw that you are, sorry, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think maybe that's an opportunity wasted, because information theory is very powerful, very general, and makes few assumptions. I mean, that's one reason why it has, and it's easier to convince people nowadays using information theoretical methods, because machine learning has shown it works really well. For those of you who are basically doubtful, I would like to mention one of my professors when I still was a postdoc. I think I was a postdoc then. Says, "Why are you interested in information theory? Isn't information theory dead?" Okay, so it goes to show that he, yeah, you know, it wasn't. So I really think that looking at that, but I wanted to make sure that I know what the current state of the art is in information and Maturana Varela. If somebody has some literature for me, I would be grateful.
Thank you. So I see another hand raised, Jan.
Yeah, I was just, well, I mean, this may be a rather minor point, and well, I've written that in the chat already, but I'm not certain. I mean, what the protocol is, which is about this sort of reluctance to call stuff living systems. I mean, I can understand that I've coded up some, well, I mean, A-life simulations, and I mean, my recollection is that there was something that was then called strong A-life, by which, I mean, people would insist that everything would be put into the same category of living systems, well, simulations and various lab-made systems and all. And well, the thing that I've noticed, and well, that is maybe a bit from an autopoiesis perspective, is that well, the difference between those sort of classically considered systems that are classically considered to be living systems, well, I mean, well, that is to say various, well, I'm going to call them carbon-based life, well, to our knowledge and understanding anyway, haven't been made by anyone, whereas, well, those lab-based systems, well, they have been ultimately made by some lab scientist, or, well, I mean, if it's a computer simulation, maybe a computer scientist. So there's a bit of a break in the autopoiesis there as well. So maybe that's one reason why, well, I mean, certainly I would also, I mean, I've never been persuaded by this so-called strong A-life perspective. And I would not call my computer simulations like living systems. And I have no qualms. Well, I mean, terminating them when I think the time to do so has come.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this converged with what we were saying before. Are there other questions? Someone from the audience would like to pose a question to our speakers?
Okay, it seems.
Yeah, sorry,
no more.
I will have one question. I would like to hear a little bit more about the links between autopoiesis and cybernetics. Or where could I read more about that?
First, I'm going to publish very soon a paper where I explain the complete relation. I don't know where you can find more, but it's a very close relation, yeah, because Maturana spent quite a long time talking with Hein von Foester and then learning the language and vocabulary of cybernetic theory. This is why the book, The Máquina y Seres Vivos, has the concept of a machine that has this property, machine, process, component. This was, if you read the book of cybernetics of Ashby, it's directly from Ashby, who was a great cybernetician. There you have a good reason. I don't know if someone has written about that.
Okay,
but
so
the relation is there, and the fact of Project 5 shows you the amazing promiscuity between all the people involved in this in that period of time.
Okay, so I look forward to your paper.
There are also here and there in Varela's article some links with cybernetics, with experimental epistemology by McCulloch or something by Wiener. There is an article called Cybernetics of Autonomy, but I think that something, a full work about this is still lacking. So we are waiting for your article. And
in fact, you should look a paper in 1971 in the journal Philosophy of Science, an article between Varela and Maturana about organization and structure of a system, to show you how aware were they about these important concepts in cybernetics. Mind you that Varela himself was a very good friend of Hein von Foester.
Yes, and he was too at the biological computer lab. He worked there too. Sure. And I wanted to ask also if the seminar you were referring to before, that Hein von Foester, Francisco Varela, and Humberto Maturana, with the best seminar of ever you mentioned before. The best. Do we have a transcript of this?
I have something even better. I have from that seminar, someone wrote an extremely precise transcript, so much that it was done as a master thesis of the University of Illinois. And I have the document, and I have the authorization of the author to be printed as a book. But I talked with Springer Verlag and said, no, we're not interested. It's only 120 pages. No, we are not interested. Then if you have an idea of what we can do with this book, it will be amazing, because it's very, very, very modern.
Put it online?
We can put it online, but no, to have a book, and a commented book, because you can go chapter by chapter and comment the chapters. It's really, today it will be a first-rate cybernetic course in any university in this planet.
I have an idea, maybe we can talk about this.
Okay. Perfect.
For the publication. Okay. So I don't know if from the audience there are other questions. So then I may ask another question then always to Juan Carlos about the relationship between Hein von Foester and Humberto Maturana. So how much you think this relationship influenced then the theory of autopoiesis? Because basically when Humberto Maturana wrote the first draft of the theory of autopoiesis, centered on the idea of closure, was at the BCL. then when they were working, Maturana and Varela, to the notion of autopoiesis, Heinz von Förster was at their lab, as Maturana lab, your lab. So how was, in what you see the influence of Heinz von Förster work in the theory of autopoiesis? And when I think to Heinz von Förster, I think also to his research network. So I think of, for example, also to Jean Piaget and of biology and cognition, biologie et connaissance, in which introduced the idea of closure and introduced the dyad structure organization. So you think that there was a strong influence?
Absolutely, because imagine the first thing, Maturana is here in Chile in 1965, and this great scientist, the director of one of the biggest labs on earth, Heinz von Förster, spends essentially 6 months of his life in the house of Maturana here in Ñuñoa, you know, two blocks from here where now. Then he spends a long time, imagine the conversations there. And then 2 years later, Maturana goes to BCL and he spent 8 months writing this technical report number 9 that is not about metabolism, it's about the nervous system. Yeah? And there you have the idea of closure. And at that moment, BCL, Ashby, you know, the great cybernetician Ross Ashby was there. Then I am sure that in this melange of ideas, this is why they cross-pollinate each other. And in 1971, von Förster returns to Chile and he gives a seminar on cybernetics at the University of Chile. And I'm sure that they talk about these things at that moment. Then, and it was a cross-pollination, very intense cross-pollination.
Maturana was always, in the interviews I've read, very precise in saying that autopoiesis doesn't have anything to do with self-organization, for example, with all the other theories about the living expressing in terms of autonomy, but through the notion of self-organization. What do you think about that?
Could be that this is for the big historian of science for 2,000 years to 200 years in the future. But when the creator of the theory of autopoiesis has living in his house for many months, the director of the laboratory called BCL, who is the laboratory of cybernetics, oh my God, you have some relation.
Oh, to keep the things.
Something must have happened there. Yeah?
So thank you so much.
Or not, you know, but this is a fact of life.
I totally agree. Thank you very much. So I don't know if there are other questions from the audience. Pasquale, we already went like 20 minutes over the time, so I don't know what you think.
Yes, Jitka told me that we can stay, but you know, if the discussion was complete, we are very happy. We have learned a lot this evening. And if there are no other questions, I believe we can stop, we can finish. And yeah, it seems this is the consensus situation. And therefore, I would like to thank you all, panelists, not only my name, but also by the other organizers, Takashi Kegami and Olaf Bykowski. And again, we have this very beautiful opportunity to commemorate Maturana and Varela. So thank you very much and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Sorry, there is Carlos, no, okay.
Thank you, Pascal, for organizing of this event. And
Jitka was here. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Jitka. Thank you.
I thank you that the participants had the chance to listen to these interesting talks and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Jitka, for everything. Thank you.
So, Jitka, I couldn't record.
No problem. I recorded these two computers, so I hope at least one of them will be okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
But the converting takes time, so I am still waiting for the conversion of Keynote. So this will be available from tomorrow on YouTube.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I will going to save the conversation for checking.
Yeah, the chat is usually saved as well, but yeah, save it as well.
Okay, yes, it is.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. So we can leave, right, Gita?
Yeah. I will close it. So just I don't usually feel bad. Push everyone back and close it.
Oh.
Yeah, so yeah, it's up to you.
Okay.
I will close it too. So good
Great,
night and thank you.
and see you tomorrow. Good
Yeah,
night.
see you tomorrow. Yeah.
Night.
Good night. Good night.
Hi, Jorge. Hi, Jorge. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye bye.